Is A.J. Brown really on his way out of Philadelphia? Or is this simply what frustration looks like when expectations aren't met? This matters because when a franchise wide receiver's future becomes a talking point, it can shape the direction of an entire offseason. After a disappointing 2025 season, the conversation around A.J. Brown and the Philadelphia Eagles has grown louder. Production dipped. Emotions were visible. Trade narratives started circulating. And in today's NFL, when noise builds like that, it rarely disappears quietly. But here's the part that deserves closer attention. According to NFL analyst Derrick Gunn, speaking via 97.5 The Fanatic, the Eagles want A.J. Brown in an Eagles uniform in 2026. That's not vague speculation. That's a clear organizational stance, at least publicly. And that statement changes the tone of this conversation. Because when frustration meets perception, perception often wins. Yet inside the building, the message appears far more stable than the outside narrative suggests. Let's unpack why. First, the numbers. Brown finished the 2025 season with 1,003 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns. For most receivers across the league, that's a strong year. But context matters. This was his least productive season since arriving in Philadelphia in 2021. It was also the first time he missed Pro Bowl and All-Pro recognition with the team. That's not just statistical decline. That's a visible shift in expectations. And expectations are everything when you're a player of his caliber. For a receiver who helped define the offense in prior seasons, not leading the team in receiving production is significant. Not because 1,003 yards isn't productive, but because Brown had set a different standard for himself and for the offense. When production dips, questions follow. Were defenses adjusting differently? Was the scheme less consistent? Was the quarterback-receiver chemistry off rhythm? Or was it simply the natural ebb and flow of a long NFL season? Derrick Gunn offered an interpretation that adds human context to those numbers. He said he believes Brown never truly wanted to leave Philadelphia. He described Brown as someone who wears his emotions on his sleeve, someone who reacts quickly, someone who allows frustration to show in the moment. That distinction matters. There's a difference between a player who is disengaged and one who is emotionally invested. From Gunn's perspective, Brown's frustration wasn't rooted solely in personal statistics. It was about offensive inconsistency. It was about the unit not performing at the level it had in 2024. It was about rhythm, efficiency, and identity. And when an offense struggles to find its identity, skilled players feel it first. Receivers operate on timing and trust. When that timing falters, it becomes visible. Routes look rushed. Body language changes. Sideline conversations draw attention. Fans and media interpret those moments through different lenses. But inside the locker room, those moments can simply reflect competitive standards. Brown addressed that perception directly during an EA Sports event on January 11th. He pushed back on the idea that he is misunderstood. Instead, he framed it in terms of competition. He said competitors understand each other perfectly fine. He emphasized that when you're in that competitive space, that's what matters. Media and fans are watching the game. Players are living it. That perspective doesn't dismiss criticism. It reframes it. There's a difference between external interpretation and internal reality. Brown also denied wanting out of Philadelphia. On the February 7th episode of the Edge podcast, he expressed his desire to return for the 2026 season. That's important. Public denials don't always settle trade speculation, but they do provide insight into intent. At the same time, Eagles general manager Howie Roseman stated on January 16th that the organization is not planning to move on from Brown despite the surrounding noise. So when you line up the statements, here's what we have. The player says he wants to stay. The general manager says they're not planning to move him. An analyst close to the situation says the relationship hasn't deteriorated beyond repair. And yet the future still feels uncertain. Why? Because frustration leaves a lasting image. And in the modern NFL cycle, perception often outruns patience. Let's talk about what likely fueled the speculation in the first place. When a star receiver has his least productive season since joining a team, that becomes a headline. When visible sideline emotions are captured on national broadcasts, that becomes discussion fuel. When the offense struggles with inconsistency compared to the previous year, that becomes narrative material. None of those elements alone signal a breakup. Together, they create ambiguity. Ambiguity creates clicks. Clicks create storylines. Storylines create pressure. But inside a front office, decisions are usually more measured than that. Roseman's public stance suggests stability. Organizations don't lightly commit to statements like that unless they believe the partnership still holds value. And Brown still provides value. Even in a down season, 1,003 yards is not replacement-level production. 7 touchdowns still matter in tight games. Defensive coordinators still adjust coverage when he's on the field. The question isn't whether Brown can produce. It's whether the offense can return to the consistency he expects. Gunn pointed out that Brown wanted the offense to resemble what it was in 2024 in terms of production. That's revealing. It implies the frustration was systemic rather than personal. When a player says, in essence, this isn't about me getting the ball every play, it's about how we function collectively, that's a leadership signal. But leadership can be misread. Some players internalize frustration. Others vocalize it immediately. Brown appears to fall into the latter category, and that visibility can create tension in public perception. The Eagles now face a delicate balance heading into 2026. They must restore offensive consistency. They must reinforce internal alignment. And they must manage external narrative. Because if 2026 starts slowly, the same questions will resurface even louder. If it starts strong, the 2025 frustrations may look like a temporary dip rather than a fracture. This is where timing becomes critical. Off-season communication between player and coaching staff will matter. Scheme adjustments will matter. Early season rhythm will matter. If Brown feels reconnected to the identity of the offense, this conversation likely disappears. If inconsistency lingers, speculation will intensify. And speculation doesn't require confirmation to grow. Another layer to consider is emotional intelligence within a locker room. Gunn mentioned that people handle emotions differently. That's true across any workplace, but especially in professional sports where pressure is constant. The difference between a competitive outburst and genuine dissatisfaction can be subtle. But teammates usually know the difference. The Eagles' internal belief, at least publicly, appears to be that Brown's emotions stem from competitive standards rather than disengagement. That distinction is critical, because a player who demands more from the offense can be an asset. A player who has checked out becomes a liability. There is no indication from the statements provided that Brown has checked out. In fact, his direct comments suggest continued commitment. Still, NFL futures can change quickly. In today's league, circumstances shift based on performance, health, and locker room dynamics. Right now, though, the alignment appears intact. So what does 2026 really represent? It represents a reset. Not a rebuild. Not a breakup. A reset. A chance for the Eagles' offense to reclaim consistency. A chance for Brown to re-establish elite production by his own standards. A chance for perception and reality to realign. Because here's the truth. Frustration isn't inherently negative. In competitive environments, Frustration often signals belief that something better is possible. If Brown didn't care, there would be no visible reaction. The intensity suggests investment, and investment suggests unfinished business. For Philadelphia, the objective is simple in theory and complex in execution. Stabilize the offense. Reinforce communication. Let production speak louder than sideline moments. If that happens, this entire chapter becomes a footnote. If it doesn't, it becomes a turning point. One more factor to consider is public messaging. When a general manager speaks as clearly as Howie Roseman did on January 16th, it sends a signal not just to fans, but to the locker room. It communicates commitment. It communicates confidence. And it communicates that the organization is not reacting emotionally to outside noise. That steadiness can influence internal morale. Players notice when leadership stands firm. They also notice when leadership wavers. Right now, the stance is firm, and that may be the most telling detail in this entire situation. Brown's words reinforce it. Gunn's analysis reinforces it. The statistical dip explains the frustration, but it doesn't confirm a fracture. So as we move toward 2026, the storyline isn't about departure. It's about response. How does Brown respond to his least productive season in Philadelphia? How does the offense respond to inconsistency? How does the organization respond to narrative pressure? Those answers won't come from quotes alone. They'll come from performance. And performance has a way of quieting debates faster than statements ever can. For now, the evidence suggests alignment rather than separation. A competitive player frustrated by inconsistency. An organization publicly committed to keeping him. An analyst close to the situation, dismissing the idea that the relationship is beyond repair. That doesn't mean there are no challenges ahead. It means the foundation still exists. And foundations matter. Before we close, consider this. If 1,003 yards and 7 touchdowns represent a disappointing year, what does that say about the standard Brown has established in Philadelphia? It says expectations are elite. And elite expectations come with emotional intensity. The Eagles don't appear ready to move on. Brown doesn't appear eager to leave. The frustration was real. The alignment, for now, appears real too. So the real story isn't whether A.J. Brown wants out. It's whether 2026 will validate the belief that this partnership still works. That's the tension. That's the opportunity. And that's why this storyline deserves measured analysis rather than dramatic conclusions. Now here's the question that matters most. Do you believe A.J. Brown's 2025 frustrations were simply the product of offensive inconsistency? Or do you think they signal deeper issues the Eagles must address before 2026 begins?